Good morning, and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, a preaching minister at the Park Avenue Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia. I'm joined, as always, by Steve Fox, a preaching minister for over 50 years. Well, how's it going?
It's going pretty well, and I stopped and think about our last two sessions together in Journey with Christ, and this is one of those chapters, Revelation 20. It'll humble
21.
20. Well, when we got done with 20, it'll humble you very quickly, and 21 kind of opens it up a little bit more. But
yeah, it's like, okay, there is something here.
I've had people in different churches where I've been, ask questions about Revelation, where I just wanted to be real honest with them and say, why don't you study things like faith and baptism and repentance and living the godly life, and why don't you study that before you jump into the false beast and the sea beast and the land beast and the false prophet, and what's the seventh toe on the left foot of the land sea beast,
Well, the relevant importance for everyone to know and to understand completely is probably 20, 21, and 22.
Exactly.
Okay? Because if we've pointed out many times, there is judgment and worship scenes all throughout this book. But the final judgment and worship scene, which decides everything, is in these last three chapters, and those are the ones that give validity to the story of Jesus Christ, because they say, hey, you're going to give an account for the deeds of your life, and the only way out of that judgment is through Jesus.
The great thing about our life here on the earth is, while we're living this life, we have an advocate.
That's right.
We have a lawyer. He's better than Clarence Darrow or Williams Jennings Bryant.
Yep.
Any of those guys. He's our lawyer, and he will go to bat for us, and he will speak for us.
That's right. And he happens to be related to the judge, so and it helps.
Well, I hadn't thought of that terminology, but yeah, you're exactly right. He's
his son.
He's the son.
He's the son of the judge. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Last time we ended in the area of verses 6 through 8. I know that we didn't get into verse 8, which you wanted to make some points about. And I'll go ahead and read it as you're gathering your thoughts here.
Okay.
But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. Jesus begins that paragraph, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, declaring everything, and those who are victorious will inherit all this good stuff. And I'll be their God, and they'll be my children. But then he says, there's a caveat here. None of my children have these qualities.
And you don't want to be in this list.
You don't want to be in this list. This is, again, going back to that idea. Just because you are a child of God does not excuse your actions and your deeds. They still have an impact into God's perception of your obedience. I mean, it kind of refutes some theological doctrines out there. It's like you can do whatever you want. Oh, no, you can't. I don't want to get into specifics, but you can get it and lose it.
I heard a guy say one time he pulled up behind a car at a stoplight, and the guy had a bumper sticker that said, "Do it if it feels right." So he slammed into the back of his car. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it makes the point.
Yeah.
And the point here is in this verse.
You can't do whatever you want.
You don't want this. These are people who made these decisions to be these things.
That's right.
And so you don't want to be a part of that list, and God's offered you the free will to decide whether you want to be a part of that list or not.
Yeah, it's one thing to say, okay, yeah, I believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and I don't want to go to that fireplace, okay? But it doesn't end there. There is, much like anyone who would get married and say, I do, it doesn't mean now that you said I do to a spouse that you can go do whatever you want.
Yeah. And if I ever change my mind, I'll tell you about it.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
It doesn't work that way. Commitments are commitments. And, that's, you talked earlier about things that we've kind of lost a sense of. Mm-hmm. We've lost what covenant means. The idea that when you give your word to God, to the Jewish people, you gave your word to God, it meant everything. One man killed his daughter because he made a promise, made this vow. Mm-hmm. It happened to be that his daughter suffered for it. Covenants, they're important.
Here in this list in verse 8, it has all these people listed, and it says, this is the second death. They will be thrown into the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. Peter in 1 Peter talks about Sodom and Gomorrah being an example of what's going to happen to the wicked. And if you go over to where Sodom and Gomorrah was, there's nothing there now.
No.
There's nothing there at all. It's not still burning after
just ash.
4,000 years. And so here when he says they're thrown into the lake of fire, which is the second death, that means they're going to be destroyed.
Yep. And
that's what happens to all these people who decided they decided for themselves that they want to be on that list.
Yep.
I know it's very difficult. Well, let me start over with it this way. I'm glad I grew up when I grew up instead of where my kids and grandkids are growing up, because I don't think I'd have been able to handle it.
I know I couldn't have. It was bad enough in the 70s.
Yeah. And, you look at this list and you say, here are people who are just making those decisions that they want to be that way. Well, you have to look at long range. The reason we get in trouble so much is we live short term.
Yes.
A bank robber never says, you know what, I'm going to go in there and get $500,000, and in the next 5 minutes after I leave the bank, the police are going to catch me and throw me in prison. Nobody ever, that's not logical to somebody. What they say is, I'm going to steal this money, and they'll never get me, and they'll never find it.
That's right.
And if you look at that whole list, you have to decide, what's my future going to be like if I make a decision I'm going to be like that?
Well, in truth, going back to what we said earlier, 20, 21, and 22, that's what this entire narrative is saying, and we've said it all along. Choose wisely. Mm-hmm. The decisions that you and I make have consequences.
Yeah.
And that is a literal law and truth of God. It's in our world that we live in. I can't go jump off a building without consequences. I can't run out in front of a car without consequences. Everything has consequences.
One of the things that I think all parents should be teaching their children is what you just said. Anything that you do will probably have consequences. Some good.
Some bad.
Some of them very, very bad. Like when he says in here that sexually immoral, I know most guys, well, not most guys, all guys that I know of
deal with this.
Yeah, they can see, all right. And some people think, well, after you get married, that none of that will bother you. You won't be looking at anybody else. It kind of got worse because you start comparing what you married to somebody else, what they married, and you stop and think, when I get in a situation like that, that's going to be exciting. It's going to be, it's going to be pretty exciting when I get in a situation like that. And what you're really saying is, I'm not going to think about the consequences.
Yeah.
I'm not going to think about my wife, my spouse. I'm not going to think about my kids. I'm just going to do this because I want to do it, and it will feel good at the time.
It will feel good at the time.
Without ever thinking there's going to be some consequences.
Yeah, I mean, there are broken men, lonely men, and let's just not classify this into men. I mean, there are women making choices that are relevant to this too. Every time when you mention that story about that it never ends, it was sort of like I'm reminded of a 20-year-old young man who was struggling with it, and he was in a group of men and they were talking, and he looked at the 80-year-old man and said, "Well, when does this end?" He said, "I don't know. I'll let you know."
Yep.
Because it never goes away. You can ask anyone who's ever dealt with whatever perspective of addictive sin that you have, and there's bukus of them, whether it's alcohol, drugs, whatever, sin, sex, all these things can form an addictive behavior, and they never ever go away. You might be able to deal with them better. They don't ever go away.
Well, that's what I think the New Testament's for. The New Testament is there to give us choices, to say this is a whole lot better. If you stay away from this, you won't be hurt. If you stay away from certain things, the consequences will be so much better. And you know, if you go through life and you look back at the things that you did during your life, there's probably a lot of us who would say, I wish I could do that over again.
There are places that I've driven my car by that when I drive by, I can't help but go back to a moment where I wish I had not done something, participated in something, and I know I'm forgiven of them.
And all of us have those temptations like you're talking about. The difference is, am I going to look at them short term
or long term,
or am I going to look at it long term?
Well, and even you could even take that perspective to a final judgment term.
Yes.
You know, and maybe I can get by with it here, but that doesn't mean you can get by with it in heaven.
And everything fits that definition in verse 8. The cowardly, the unbelieving, murderers, immoral persons, sorcerers, idolaters, all liars. And I don't think that means if you told all liars. If you told a lie when you were 12. I think that's talking about living a life of lying. And you and I have been around people who they would rather lie than tell the truth.
Even when the truth would serve them better.
Exactly. Well, what's going to happen to that list? They're going to be thrown into the lake of fire, which is the second death.
This is second death. Well, you want to sneak on into verse 9 through 14?
And one of the seven angels who had seven... Boy, we're going to have a lot of sevens.
Yeah, we're back to some bowls and plagues.
One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of seven last plagues came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem. And here's a description again.
Yep.
Coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, as a stone of crystal clear jasper. It had a great and high wall with 12 gates. And all the gates, 12 angels, and the names were written on them, which are those of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. God likes the number 7, and he really likes the number 12.
12, yes.
It had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and the gates were 12 angels, and the names were written on them, which are those of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the west. And the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And the one who spoke with me had a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and its wall. And the city is laid out on a square, and the length of it is great as its width. And he measured the city with the rod. 1,500 miles in length and width and height are equal. Lots of 7s, lots of 12s.
Yeah, and again, we pretty much know that most of this numerical stuff is for illustration purposes.
Exactly.
But going back to the bigger theme here, these 7 angels and the 7 bowls and come, I will show you the bride of life. I mean, these are the ones that were sent out to who did the things, and evidently now they're going to show you what was talked about in the earlier verses. This New Jerusalem, this bride of Christ.
He's asking them to close their eyes and think of the old Jerusalem and what they lived with and what they did for centuries.
Imagine what this is going to be.
And now he wants you to close your eyes and say, this is what the New Jerusalem looks like.
And he's giving a sense of grandeur and overwhelming value, beauty, anything that you could begin to imagine. Like today, we might make the city not look described as Jerusalem was then, but it might be described in with gardens, whatever would be the most beautiful thing you could begin to imagine. This is what this is going to be, because we don't have the words to describe what God's reality is.
And he takes those words and describes for us the Taj Mahal times 20.
Yeah.
Just take the most beautiful place you've ever been to and, like he said, multiply it.
Yeah, because we can't get there with our words. And first of all, our understanding. We've just not experienced anything that's like this. And the scale of it is massive. 1,500 miles. I mean...
Up. Cubed.
I mean, that's a big place. That's a big place. And of course, again, see how easy it is for me to get sucked into physical reality? I called it a place, but though it's this being described as such, it's still representative of this is the bride. It says right there, the bride of the Christ, bride of Christ.
Yep.
Is what this is. Who's the bride of Christ? The church.
Yeah.
So, I mean, wow.
She is the wife of the Lamb.
Yep. It's...
And also, it doesn't use the word here, but there's another scene of judgment. You're either in this New Jerusalem or you're thrown in the lake of fire.
Yeah, you're invited or you're not.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so and he ended with that in verse 8 with that at the negative side of that judgment, and then those who are left, here you are.
And when you think about these judgment scenes, last week we talked about this a little bit, and a lot of those things that you deal with in life are deterrents to your conduct. Like if I say,
yes,
I remember when I was 12 years old at church camp, standing around a campfire, looking into that fire, thinking, I don't want to be thrown into fire. When you ask people about hell, the first thing they think of is fire.
Fire, that's right.
And nobody wants to be thrown into fire.
Nope.
So, that can have a great influence on somebody who's standing there looking at that fire, or whatever other
some people
judgments there are.
Don't even want to talk about being buried in the ground.
No, that's right.
So, I mean,
But fear can do that to you. It can do that with fire. Most of us brush our teeth every morning and every night because we saw something.
We love doing that, don't we?
Yeah,
I love making.
Because they showed you pictures of people who didn't brush their teeth.
Right.
And
it's a deterrent.
Yeah. Or the kid who gets his first driver's license, just drives as fast as he can, and then he sees a couple of wrecks where people got killed. He might back off a little bit.
Or one of his buddies gets pulled over for reckless driving and spends a little bit of time in a facility to help deter that kind of behavior.
Like the state patrolman that pulled a guy over at Elkview and said, "Do you have any ID?" He said, "About what?"
I have no clue.
Or maybe that might have been in Hamlin. I don't remember which one where that was. Fear will make you do things it'll make you rethink some things. It will.
It will put, the consequences can put things in the proper perspective.
And there's no consequence worse than the lake of fire.
No, there is nothing worse. And to add one more caveat into that, you never know when your time's up too. That's another deterrent.
Exactly. This might be your last day.
This might be your last day. Have you made it right? So
live it well and do what you say a little while ago. Choose
wisely.
Wisely.
Choose wisely. Is there anything else in there?
All the walls and all the gates and all the stones. No, I don't think there's a whole lot there that we can
just to give some people some clarification on this, I mean, this is stuff that comes from Ezekiel. I guess is there any other references in any other books? It's just a kind of like a reminder that John is making to those who would be of Jewish descent. They would have already, a lot of this, they would have already transposed over to the fact that because of some of their Jewish thought, these were the ideas of what heaven was going to be like. But John's just reiterating, it's the Lamb that's the important thing, and what you understood before doesn't even begin to express or explain the grandeur of what this is going to be like. Because as we have the deterrent, the punishment helps deter. Also, we have the same kind of carrot in front of the donkey, the diamond. You know, all of us know that if it's someplace we want to be, it helps us want to be.
Yeah.
You know. I'll go ahead and where did you quit reading?
I think
You quit at 16, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Beginning in verse 17. The angel measured the wall using human measurement, and it was 144 cubits thick. The wall was made of jasper, and the city of pure gold, as pure as glass. The foundation of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone. This first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth ruby, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, and the 10th turquoise, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12...
Can you say the 12th amethyst 4 times in a row?
No. Shame.
You and I being...
I need to deter you.
You and I being guys, we don't have any idea what all those gems are.
Some of them I do, some of them I don't.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you're right. But I know that's probably why I probably said some of those words wrong. But
I know the next one in 21 very well.
The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each gate made of a single pearl, the great street of city.
That's one huge oyster in it.
Oh, man. I don't want to run into that in the water.
12 gates.
The great city of the great street of the city was of gold, as pure as transparent glass. I mean, for a guy, this probably doesn't have its appeal to as it would to sometimes for those who love all the descriptive terms of jewelry. Now, if they'd have told me the walls was made out of bacon or
cheesecake,
and I'm just making a joke, but you know, again, this is not necessarily being literal, but what it's saying is the understanding of value cannot be grasped. This is just as close as I can get to God telling you, you can't grasp how beautiful, magnificent, and valuable this place is. Mm-hmm. You want to be here, you know? Imagine. I mean, it's like planning a vacation and you go to the Motel 6. Nothing against Motel 6.
Motel 8.
Okay, but let's go Motel 7 in honor of our story.
7.5, and we stopped the bidding there.
Yeah. But you could have stayed at the most luxurious resort. And that's what this is, you know. So it's pretty amazing. Of course, here comes my favorite part of this chapter. I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives its light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. On no day will its gates ever be shut, for there will be no night there. The glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. Nothing impure will ever enter it, nor will anyone who does what is shameful or deceitful, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. Now this is a description that is mind-boggling as far as it has the theological moment or meaning. There's no need for sun, and you and I can't even comprehend that, or the moon. There's never a night, because that's when all the bad things happen, after dark, and everyone there will walk, the nations will walk by its light, and the moment you've been waiting for, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it.
All this stuff about the New Jerusalem, the gems, the measurements, the walls, how big it's going to be, the gates of pearl. And if you notice in 21, it doesn't say streets. It says there's a street. So
Street.
I'm just being picky here, but a lot of people talk about the streets of gold. Well, the Bible says there is a street.
The great street.
Yeah, some of our songs in our book we wouldn't be able to sing about streets of gold. But like you said, God is the temple, Almighty is the temple, and the Lamb is the temple, and they provide all the light.
Everything.
You don't have a sun and a moon, stars anymore, because they provide all the light. My favorite paragraph, as Mark just alluded to, and the nations shall walk by its light, and the kings of the earth shall bring their glory into it. Let me offer you a little assignment if you're interested in this. Go back through the book of Revelation, and every time it says kings of the earth, underline it. Then when you get to the end, add them all up and look at how each of them are characterized.
Yep.
Because the kings of the earth in Revelation, without exception, until you get here, are the bad guys. Black hats and white hats, the kings of the earth are wearing the black hats. They're making trouble for this New Jerusalem and the Old Jerusalem. And the kings of the earth are never mentioned in a good light. They are always the bad guys. And so what happens in verse 24? The nations shall walk by its light. The nations of the earth shall come into the New Jerusalem, somehow have an effect on the New Jerusalem. And the kings of the earth shall bring their glory into it. Somehow the kings of the earth went from being thrown into the lake of fire to being people who walk by the light of God and also bring their glory into the New Jerusalem.
I think you could also make the case too, and I get what you're saying there, that this now is a new earth and a new heaven. Could this be? And kings of earth doesn't necessarily mean kings, because it just means the leaders of the earth, the ones who were in charge. Given the fact that we are now in a new earth and a new heaven, and we know all those attributes that don't get you into heaven, which these other men had, they can't be necessarily. It's speaking of two different circumstances. Maybe these are the people who did live and were the leaders who did do the things, and that God recognized as men who, or women, that behaved and are here now doing what they were always doing.
They went from that human standpoint to the divine standpoint. And another lesson that I think is very obvious here is don't ever give up on anybody.
No.
Because these kings of the earth, all the way through Revelation, they're the bad guys.
But
And
doesn't mean
so-
they all got saved.
No, it does not mean
Okay.
that. But somehow there was an influence of these kings that they changed their minds, and
Or
their
at least some did.
conduct and their behavior kept them from the lake of fire and allowed them to be in the New Jerusalem, which is your two choices.
Yeah. Well, it's just like it says that men and women are going into the lake of fire, and there are men and women going into heaven. Doesn't mean all men and all women. It doesn't mean just because it gives the expression the kings of the earth. Again, I think that is a descriptive classification.
Yes.
It's not specific.
And 26 kind of implies that there will be something here on the earth that you could describe as being the new heavens and the new earth, or the new Jerusalem, because he says in 26, these kings of the earth, will bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. So
Yeah.
somehow there's still nations, individual nations like we know now.
Yes.
And nothing, and here's another list. Don't practice abomination and lying. Don't enter into if you do that, you will not enter into that New Jerusalem, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. God, through Jesus, through His Spirit, has a book that has people's names in it. They got there because they obeyed the Lamb.
That's right. And the clarification, or the continual clarifying of behavior and responsibility, is still being applied, even as far as we're at the end of 2 chapters where it's just explicitly stated. Here's the qualifications. Meet them. But if you don't, it's on you. I'm often bothered by those whose theological thought process goes like this, that God is punishing those for their behavior. That part, though I know we're judged by our deeds, but our deeds are representative of our choices. Okay? It's like you said earlier, if you don't choose wisely and you choose poorly, you get what's coming to you. It's not like you get whatever you ask for.
In our society, we talked about this last week, but in our society, you read something in the paper about a drunk driver hit a car and killed a couple people, and then his defense is, well, I'd been drinking. Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's consequences to your drinking.
Yeah.
Or there's consequences
To drinking and driving.
drug use and drinking and driving. But you read about it all the time, or hear about it all the time. Well, I'm not responsible for me breaking into that restaurant because I was on drugs.
Yeah.
Well, you're paying the consequences of doing those things. And a lot people who are a lot smarter than I am, you've often heard them say, if you don't start, you don't ever have to quit.
I think that's why Paul was so adamant in 2 Corinthians 5 that when Jesus died for everyone. But did you choose to take Jesus on what He did? And it's what it boils down to. None of us, as Paul many times, well, all the books point out completely, you go there because you didn't want to obey God. You didn't want to choose God. And God says, okay, if that's what you want, you can have it. I'm not making anybody come into heaven. It's your choice.
And I know this is a great long theological discussion we could get into, but it was Adam and Eve's choice in the beginning too, and that's why they were kicked out of the garden. Now I don't think when that happened, God went, "Oh man, I didn't see that coming.
No.
I didn't know they were going to do that." Of course, God knew they were going to do that.
Paul says in Colossians, he knew from before he even laid the foundations of the earth.
Before the foundations of the earth. That's right.
So yeah, he knew that we were incapable of doing this, but it speaks volumes into the character of God when he knew what our inability to do this, but would do everything he could for those who would want to be with him. They could. If they didn't want to be with him, that was their choice. I will grant you that choice. You will never be with me. I'm not making anybody be with me. But if you want to be with him, understand. You can't, it's not a half-hearted thing. It's either yes or no. One or the other. It's not walking on the nothing. And I love the fact that nothing, as you brought out earlier, we talk about no crying, no mourning, none of these other things, but there's also this idea that there's nothing impure or whatever in it, nor when anyone does what is shameful or deceitful, like you just said. It is just a overwhelming place. Well, that will conclude this week's Journey with Christ. I hope that you've enjoyed. We're down to the last chapter, and we look forward to doing it the following next week. And if you have any questions, any comments, anything you would like to share with us, please don't hesitate to do so. We'd love to hear what you have to say. You have anything to add before we move on?
I'd like to suggest that people are reading along with us. When you read this week next week Revelation 22, go back and read the first couple paragraphs in chapter 1, because he repeats what he said in chapter 1 in chapter 22, and he's talking about a time period, which I think will help you in your research and your study of the book of Revelation. The other thing I wanted to mention is, for those of you who didn't get to see our class last week, we are all like the Apostle Paul, because we're all on the road to Damascus. Just keep praying that one of these days we'll all be Damascus.
Be demasked.
Be demasked.
Well, on behalf of Steve and I, have a good week.